Hello, everyone, and welcome to the live stream. I'm just joking around. You're not going to lose your jobs. Not just yet, anyway. I don't think so. And what am I talking about today? I'm talking about computers, tech, AI, technology in the architecture profession, but the built environment. We're all experimenting with chat GPT at the moment. And last year, Midjourney kind of took off. Everyone was generating all these cool buildings. So it's probably on trend to talk about now the future and what we think will happen with all this tech and how it's going to impact your jobs potentially. But rather than just me talking about it, it's always better if I've got an industry expert. And that is why I've got the awesome Jordan Harris here. Jordan, how are you, sir?
Not too bad overall.
Jordan, you get an A star for getting here, especially when I almost messed up the invites to get here. So you've kind of zoomed in for this live appearance. I appreciate it. But Jordan, while I know you from the industry, for anyone that doesn't know you and what you do, can you tell us briefly about yourself?
Yes. Okay. So my name's Jordan. Obviously, job description's a bit weird. My technical job description is systems architect and digital operations manager, which is basically a made-up term for they couldn't find a good role for me. Pretty much. I started in architecture, and I did that for many years. I did sort of the conventional part 1, part 2 undergrad masters. But I've always been more tech oriented, and I sort of began to take a shift more towards the tech industry, learning the basics of coding and sort of where that can go. From there, I expanded more into sort of the BIM side of things, and also taking courses in AI and in data science, basically building AI machine learning algorithms. And where I'm at right now is I'm sort of trying to take all of these technologies and architecture being something that's always been a little more technophobic, and bring them together and see where we can go with those in the future, and sort of see where that's going to be going in the next 10, 15 years. That's sort of my role at the moment, as well as the general day-to-day fixing people's computers and other such sort of more mundane areas of technology as well.
Well, there you go. You got it. We've got to have all angles, isn't it? And unfortunately, like you said, as being an architect, you've got Outlook, you've got Revit, but also you're kind of dealing with the procedures and all this new cool stuff as well. So I find it really fascinating. And one of the things that we talk about on the Architecture Social as well is alternative careers. So maybe just before we talk about, I've got my own thoughts on AI and Chat GPT and all that stuff, and we're going to save that later, but also in the audience here, if you do want to share your thoughts on anything that we're talking about, if you wanted to ask Jordan a question, you can do as well. But before we do that, Jordan, I'm always curious because, like myself, you're a part 2. You're a qualified part 2 architectural assistant. You're not an architect, neither am I, which is totally cool. Now, I see...
quite gone down that one yet.
No, maybe one day you can do it, but you've got a lot on your plate with the IT, the digital, the BIM. You're doing enough. You don't have to worry about qualifying for now. But tell me, why did you choose to kind of go down this avenue of an alternative career than the typical part 3?
Yeah, it's, well, many reasons. One of the reasons I quite like tech is that it's a little less prescribed and regulatory than architecture. Architecture, I think when you do undergrad, you see all the pretty drawings, the amazing designs, and you sort of envision yourself as, the next Renzo Piano or B.R. Gingolson or any of these sort of very influential architects. And then you get into the industry and you realize that is absolutely not the case. You spend most of your time doing schedules and sort of writing design and access statements, which is fine. It's all well and good, but everything is sort of very forceful. You have to fight for anything, any creative license, and it's very draining. You see a lot of burnout in architecture. I think the people that sort of become complicit with design, they sort of just give up a little bit and they go, that does the job because it's, it settles, we've done it, it meets the regulations, and there's a little pushing of the envelope, I think, there. Whereas in tech, if I want to go and make a new website, or if I want to go and develop a new technology, I can sit at my laptop and I can just plug away and do it. And there's no restrictions or requirements. And there are more coming in over time in terms of GDPR and privacy, but very limited. So it gave me a lot of options to expand and grow. And it still sort of scratches that same itch of creativity that architecture always did. I think a
Yeah.
lot of people think of tech as not massively creative, but it absolutely can be. It just depends on how you take it and where you go with it. And I also feel in the same way as sort of we used to have draftspersons as a massive part of the industry, and then
Yeah.
AutoCAD and MicroStation, things like that came into the industry, and those began to phase out. They haven't gone entirely, but they're mostly removed or translated into newer roles. And we've seen that sort of again a little bit with BIM. I feel like it's probably going to be the same again with AI, where it won't knock out the whole industry. I think a lot of people are over exaggerating its impact. It will be a big impact, but it's not going to be the impact that I think a lot of people think, where it's just automating design. It will more be the tools will be more efficient, so you need less people to do the same job.
Yeah. Well
And then,
said. It is interesting. And just touching upon that, you're right, because so 10 years ago, um, in the UK, all the practices were moving over to Revit. And some practices still are. That's the crazy thing. It's not clear cut. And as you know, Jordan, as well, it's one thing to say, oh, we're gonna get Revit in the office. There's procedures, there's workflows, and you touched upon it a bit, and I agree that actually there's an art form in designing the processes to enable designers to design. So that's a bit of a mouthful, but you get what I mean. So is that one of the things that you really enjoy in your role then, Jordan? Like optimizing the workflow, trying to get everything as efficient as easy as possible
yeah,
for the designers?
it sounds as boring as all hell, but yeah, I really enjoy that. I spend probably more time than I'd like to admit sitting there designing file structures and how do we make sure people do this and how do we make sure that no one sort of goes rogue and starts using random line types or random families in models and breaking stuff. Sounds very
Yeah.
boring, but it's one of those pet peeves I actually quite enjoy, weirdly.
Yeah, fair enough. And another bit that resonated with me. So I put out an advert recently for the Arctic Social. If people want to do a bit of writing in terms of content, then
Mm.
please get in touch for the newsletter. Now, in theory, with ChatGPT, and we will talk. And I'd love to get your thoughts on potential architecture applications and that in just a second. But what the thing is, right? I'm like you. It's a really great tool for maybe some mundane stuff or some basic things or some quick directions. But that's the key thing. I feel like I still need to direct it on what
Mm.
to do. I don't see it necessarily replacing someone's job yet. I don't necessarily seeing it perhaps designing a residential building. However, I can see it being really useful for perhaps an email that, if you, for instance, you're tired, you're not sure, you want to just check things, and maybe it suggests an email. There could be a practical use for it. I mean, what's your thoughts on everyone freaking out about ChatGPT and AI at the moment?
So there is actually already an application out there that designs buildings using AI. It's called Finch. It's currently
Oh,
due to be
wow.
released in the next few months. It's sort of in a beta program, I think. Um, and it sort of plugs into Rhino, if I'm remembering correctly,
Oh,
um,
wow.
and runs
I'll
through.
bring
Yeah,
it up.
it runs. I can't actually remember the model it used off the top of my head, but it's essentially utilizing a Python script through Dynamo. Yeah, and it's able to sort of automate design. The thing with this, and this is actually something I was saying to one of my directors the other day, it doesn't matter how advanced the stuff gets, because at the end of the day, the only time this will replace your job, if you're the one thinking about design. So if you're a quote unquote CAD monkey or BIM monkey, then you might want to look into this a bit more. But otherwise, if you're the actual creative, if you're the person that's making decisions, you're understanding the design and the user, and you're translating that into the built environment, you're fine. Because at the end of the day, the only time this is an issue is if a client comes to you and they know exactly what they want from the get-go, because
Mm,
they have to ask the question. And that's the thing a lot of people forget, is you have to know how to ask the question. If you don't know that, you can't use the tool. And there is a very lack of appreciation. There's a considerable lack of appreciation for that as a skill set. You have to understand, why do we do it this way? And also understand when the AI is wrong. AIs are not perfect. They're precedent based. So this one here uses something called a recurring neural network, I believe. which essentially means you have nodes called neurons. And what happens is each neuron looks for a pattern. So you give it the training data set and the test data set, and you split it. So what you do is you essentially give sort of 70, 80% of it to learn on, and then you give it the correct answers. And what it's going to do is it's going to try and build these neurons and look for common patterns until it spits out something that is correct. Now, AIs can make mistakes. They can look for instance, if you, let's say, as an example, if every single design you scanned was from the same practice, it might see the footer or a particular detail or a particular line weight or pattern as a correct design element because it's common. But it might just be that is a graphical choice. And it would think that that is actually something that should be in design. But it could be a fluke, or it could be, there's lots of examples of this. For instance, hospital very recently used a similar sort of system to this to try and detect lung cancer. It was very successful. I think it was like 99.9% successful in testing. It wasn't. The reason it was successful is because it turned out every single one of the people that actually did have cancer, there was a small dot on them that the doctors were putting to mark, and it would see those on every single scan and realize that those are common. So it's just looking for common features, but it isn't that it's looking for, it doesn't understand I need to look for this feature. It just knows I need to find something common between these elements. You can do that with buildings as well. So you can, if you give it 300 floor plans that are good, and you categorize it, you say, this is a good house, this is a good, these common elements need to be there, it can probably figure that out. But you also need to be able to look at that and understand, actually, we probably shouldn't have a 1200 by 1200 bathroom. That might be a little on the small side. And it might have figured that out because it might have gone, okay, well, actually, most bathrooms maybe are long and thin in these house designs. That's long and thin, that's long and thin, but in a different orientation. I'm going to crop the two down because both are correct. So you can easily get mistakes like that form. So it's a tool to speed up the process and to try and remove a lot of that variation in design, but it isn't inherently just a designing tool. It sort of increases the workflow improves the workflow rather than simply just replacing the designer. I think it's the most wordy way of saying, don't worry too much.
Yeah, I agree with you. And even a very basic example. So, for instance, I do a lot of recruitment with EPR architects. We do their internal recruitment, and I thought experimenting with it, get the bio, let's see what AI can generate. And it was very interesting, Jordan. Like you say, it was a very convincing output, which the AI had. However, there were wrong dates for instance, when it was founded, it wasn't quite accurate. And that's partly as well because AI is built, I'm guessing, on all this information out there, isn't it? So some bits, it's hard to say an accurate answer. I know that Google, because Google have released their AI to go against ChatGPT, and there's a big hoo-ha, Jordan, because they put in an ad, a question, and the AI generated it, and it was wrong. It was the wrong answer. So,
what it's like anything. The problem with AI and the reason it's dangerous is because, okay, I actually probably should clarify something because this is a very common thing. AI really isn't a thing yet, even though it's a buzzword. True AI means it's essentially conscious. It's able to understand context. Very few are at that point yet. We have a few that are in development that might be. True AI isn't really a thing yet. ChatGPT isn't a true AI. There are two main systems that are used, which is machine learning and deep learning. Machine learning is what we've seen for the majority of sort of the last 10, 15 years when we've seen kind of these clever automated tools. That is very prescriptive. Someone is literally sitting there, telling it the right answer and telling it how, manually sort of adjusting it till it gets the correct answer. So things like fingerprint sensors, face recognition, most of that would have been machine learning. Deep learning is the new one. That's also why we're seeing everything coming out all at the same time. They're all sort of suddenly coming out because it's a very, very recent technology. And it's relying on reductions in cost of running the machines and also the advancements of technology in developing the algorithms they actually use. So they all more or less rely on sort of very similar algorithms and methods of working. It's just slight variations between each company and each technology. But deep learning is different than machine learning because no one is actually sitting there telling it how to solve the problem. You're giving it data, you're giving it general prompts to push it one way or the other, but you're not exactly saying that is what you need to be doing. You're kind of roughly nudging it, and then it has to figure itself and learn by itself, which is very clever and very effective, but it also means it makes mistakes, and you're not sitting there granularly changing it, so it can be much faster, but also much harder to control. And that's why it can make mistakes, and that's why it can seem to do weird, random things.
Very interesting. I agree with you as well on that AI tends to be a very marketing buzzword, doesn't it, Jordan? And I'm like, I've used AI for a few years, especially when it comes to web design or mailing lists, and you're like, is that really true AI? I'm not convinced. What I was going to say, Jordan, while we've been talking, Patrick actually says, I think it was to one of your earlier points when he says, I think Jordan is correct. AI is just a newer, very good tool, but a tool. There is certainly an expertise in using any tool to the level of a craft person. And why should this be any different? So fair enough. Perhaps another tool in the toolbox. That's what I wanted to get your pick your brains on this then, Jordan, because AI is the buzzword. People are freaking out or they're loving it, and we're seeing all these cool stories in the news. But you're doing this day-to-day job where you're focused on the systems, you're focused on the digital tech within an architecture practice. So the practice that you work in is a Hale Architects. I'll bring them up really briefly now. But what I would love to know is like, rather than the AI per se, and you might still say that AI is the most important thing this year, but what are you excited at the moment, or what do you think is going to have the biggest impact on architecture tech in the industry based on what you see at the moment?
That's a good one. I definitely think AI will have a big impact. In terms of new technologies, that's a difficult one.
Or current ones,
yes,
that you think are important.
I think digital twins is going to be a really big development soon. I see that. For those that don't know, by the way, digital twins is essentially it's sort of an evolution of BIM, not quite. It's more of a sort of a parallel technology, which I can explain a little bit more in a minute. But in essence, the premise of it is that it sort of does what BIM never quite managed to, which was it allows you to attach all your data effectively to a model and hand it over to a client in a form that's actually usable. The problem with BIM and the reason it never quite, I think, it's never been as successful as it really should have been, is that we spend all this time developing a very clever model. We stick all of our data in, it becomes parametric, and it can, it sources everything, and it's essentially a database for the built environment for your building. And then you finish with it, and you should hand it over to the client. What client understands Revit? What client can update that model and sort of maintain it and actually utilize it in a meaningful manner? So as a result, it sort of becomes a dead-end product. Digital twin is intended to sort of take that a little bit further and becomes reactive. It gives accountability for your lights, your M&E, your all the products in the building, and it gives you the ability to say, that door handle's fallen off. Do we still have warranty to it? Who made it? Who supplied it? Where do we get a replacement? Who do I contact for this? That's the theory behind it, at least.
It's so I used to work a lot within real estate as well. So FM management, that's kind of where this example that you're on about would be really useful, isn't it? The life cycle of the building. So, well, that's really fascinating. There's a little video here, so I'll bring it up if I can. Let's see. We can put it on the background. I never heard of digital twins until we spoke before. I always got it confused, Jordan, with Twin Motion. So that's my amateur hour. But there's two separate things, right? It's completely different.
Twin Motion is a good tool as well, to be fair.
That's more like visuals. And I mean, where Twin Motion, it gets me interesting, because I wrote my dissertation years upon it, is the video game technology. So like years ago, I used to do a blooming render in 3D Max, and I'd be there for like 6 hours on the best settings. Whereas now you've kind of got the feedback from Enscape and all that in Revit, using the 3D game engines. Maybe quickly in that foray, do you see that being used more and more in architecture practices, or do you still think there's
Yes,
a resistance to use those kind of tech?
yes, I do. For me, and this is probably a very controversial one for many people, I actually see it as the modern day evolution of the scale model, in that a lot of people treat renders as an output product. You know, that is for giving to your client, it's a pretty sales thing. It shouldn't be. It should be interactive. You should be using it in the design process, because you can't really sit in Revit and understand, how the light is affecting a space, or how a facade is affecting the space. And Twinmotion is a great tool. Unreal Engine 5 is also a really good one, which they're both built by the same company.
Yeah.
I use this myself sometimes. And it's also nice. It comes with Revit now, which is a nice freebie. But it's got a really nice, it has the ability of actually sitting inside of a model, sitting inside of a building, and testing different materials, different textures, different feelings, in the same way as you would have done in the past with all scale models. You can look inside of it, you can sort of see how lighting affects it, you can see how slight material changes and slight textural changes will actually affect the lighting. And because it's so accurate, because it's so close to reality, you can actually be quite truthful with it. You can set it to be geolocated, you can set realistic suns, you can use realistic backgrounds and materials that are quite accurate in terms of real life materials. Going forward, there are you can use materials from a company called Quexel, which again ties into the whole Unreal thing. That Epic Games have basically just gone and bought up everything in one of the industries at this point. And those materials are scanned. They're HDRI, so they're very high resolution. I think they're like 8 or 16K, if I can remember right. Very, very high resolution textures. They literally have scanned, and they very accurately model texture and grain and reflections.
Wow, it's I'm amazed at how far it's going. But the thing that comes to mind, Jordan, when you're speaking, is that I remember years ago, and you laugh, so showing my age here, but in 2015, I went to BIM Show Live, right? It was a big show, and they used to have sometimes architecture practices coming around, being like, "We're adapting BIM," and then you used to get some practices perhaps challenging it, like, "Whoa, we're really good in CAD. You can't do these kind of buildings in BIM." And there would be resistance, Jordan. And I wonder, and I'd love to get your thoughts on it, because you're in an architecture practice, and typically you'll have people who would love embracing the tech, but equally you're going to get some people which are a bit more hesitant. What would you say to someone right now who's very hesitant towards the AI, hesitant towards real time rendering, and as you say, kind of those scripting AIs and all the stuff we talked about? Do you have any advice for someone hesitant?
At the end of the day, they are just tools. That is the base premise of it. So you're just adding new tools to your tool set. I would say in terms of the automation and the AI and the visual side of things, all you're really doing at that point is you're trying to use your knowledge and translate it into a more efficient means of creating. At the end of the day, you're the person that's dictating the tool and controlling the tool to represent your understanding of the space, understanding of design, understanding of the regulations, of the requirements of the clients. So doing that by hand might be nice. Doing it by CAD is nice. Doing it by Revit or an AI is nice, but it's all achieves the same output. It's just how you get to that output. If I give you a complicated site with a strange envelope with lots of design conditions, maybe it has to be fully Part 3M compliant, and you have to be able to access it fully with wheelchairs. Maybe you need to have changing spaces, bathrooms. All of these things are quite difficult to design around. You can spend hours and hours and hours and hours and hours trying to figure out the best layout, or you can give an AI the rules, design the bits that are important to you, the spaces that are actually enjoyable, or the spaces you want to design, and then let the AI figure out, well, actually, I can fit, this here and this there, and I can put a ramp along here. And that's where these tools, I think, are going to be really useful. It's actually going to give you more time and more excuse to actually do good quality buildings, rather than constantly trying to chase your tail and be attempting to sort of fix problems that are unnecessarily difficult. Humans are not very good at solving sort of pattern problems in terms of spatiality. We're very bad at that. It's why it's always been a skill. If I have to split up a building that's complicated and figure out how I can put everything into it, that is a complicated skill. AI is very good at that. They're very, very good at that sort of thing. And that gives you time and space and excuse to sort of sit there and go, well, actually, I really want that facade to look this way, or actually, I want this really nice, glass facade and glass atrium with, cantilevered elements all the way along it. You can actually afford to spend that time. So it's just giving architects, I think, a little more of the domain back. I actually think we're going to have more control going forward, because it's going to get, but it also depends if the industry adopts it or not. If we don't adopt it, what's going to happen is we're going to have another job emerge, my job probably, that's going to be its own role that then takes even more of the architect's role, like we've seen with, every other part of the architect's job over the last sort of 100-odd years. But I also think it's a great opportunity if architects do embrace the technology and they do start adopting these new systems. It will give us more design control back, and will give us more of the industry back.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Even in my business, I'm always looking at optimizing stuff. I hate, right, if there's an opportunity to avoid manual entry, then I'm up for it. I've got some horror stories, Jordan, during my part 1 and part 2, where I was just in CAD. So it was at MicroStation at the time. Things are all on the same layer. You're just doing the stupidest rubbish stuff, thinking like, what am I doing? Or counting areas in this crazy, drawing late at night for a submission. And I think that you're right. They're all opportunities to change. And the best bit about AI, in my opinion, even now, is I try to get it to do the stuff which I find mundane, the stuff that is repetitious. And it allows you then to think about the key things which are really important. Designing that building, get what we really want to do is that it frees us up to do that. What I was going to say to you is, me and you are both part 2s, right? So unfortunately, we're getting older, but there's a lot of students as well, and we focused on the ways you can use these tools within practice. However, Jordan, if you were a student now, right? Say now someone's watching this video and is thinking, this is really cool ideas for practice. I'm interested in that stuff. But if you were studying architecture again, is there anything that you'd keep an eye on now that's cool stuff that you think would be good to look at?
If you want to sort of prepare yourself for sort of the ability to do AI, and that's an area that interests you, Grasshopper and Dynamo are great if you just want to sort of dip your toe into automation for design. That's a good one if you want to have a little more control. If you want to go a bit further and you really want to have some impressive control, Python. If you learn Python, isn't that tricky. It's not any much harder than something like AutoCAD. It's just a command-based scripting language. It's just understanding the basic premises of it. That really opens a lot of opportunities, because with Python, you can then use things like TensorFlow, which is Google's sort of machine learning engine.
Okay.
You can then, virtually all AI nowadays is written in Python derivative packages. So the main one is sklearn, TensorFlow, SciPy, and then things like Pandas and NumPy are really good for sort of data and analytics and data processing. These are all really useful tools that allow you to build AI. And if you learn Python and sort of NumPy and Pandas and TensorFlow, you can sit there and you can build AIs in minutes.
Wow. No, carry on. Sorry, there's a bit of delay on my end there.
No. I was just thinking. So in terms of, if that's sort of where you're interested maybe going, that would be a good system to learn. If you're more interested in sort of the visual side, you want to be a bit creative. Obviously, Unreal Engine 5 is fantastic, and from there you can also learn Python again, or C. I mean, Python. If you want to learn coding within architecture, Python is the only really good choice, because Revit utilizes Python, so does Unreal Engine 5. So both of those you can actually script into them to make them do things. So for instance, Dynamo actually is built on top of Python. So you can actually write Python scripts within Dynamo and save a lot of time and energy and make it do things it's not really supposed to do.
Yeah. It's such an important skill, isn't it, Jordan? Because I remember even when I was looking at about Dynamo and Vasari and stuff. I think it was Iron Python at the time. Now I'm really
Mm,
rusty, but programming language I think is so useful because even like me, right? And I don't practice architecture anymore, but with my website, so I found that there's a lot of PHP involved, CSS and bits of HTML, but having even a basic understanding is really, really important. And we talked about in the past web design as well. And
mm.
okay, it's another foray. But once you start to understand one coding language, it's a lot easier then to learn the others, or you see similarities. It's a bit like AutoCAD, MicroStation, Vectorworks, or now
Exactly.
ArchiCAD and Revit. I think it's a really important skill for anyone listening here to start experimenting in that. And so it's just nice to hear you confirm that as well, you know?
Oh, absolutely. And everyone thinks of coding as being this really, really challenging thing to learn. It's not the easiest thing, don't get me wrong, but it's a lot more understanding how it works rather than
Yeah.
a lot of it isn't just, oh, I have to remember all of these different commands and different systems. A lot of it's more understanding how code interacts with a computer, and also understanding what you want it to do.
Yeah.
Um, the actual coding side of things isn't that tricky because at the end of the day, there is a lot of documentation support, million tutorials out there. You can go onto YouTube and learn everything you could ever want to learn in Python for
Yeah.
no cost at all. You just sit there and watch a tutorial or build something from there. It's not all that tricky. Um, and it's more about control. Learning how to code in terms of with architecture lets you automate a lot of things, but it also gives you a lot more control over the tools you're using. I
Yeah.
can make Revit do things in 10 minutes that would probably take someone doing the conventional click and drag a day to do. Now,
Yeah.
I have to know what I'm doing, but it gives you that level. Well, Finch is built just using Dynamo and Python. That's what that's built on.
Okay.
So that's the
Interesting.
sort of thing you can do with it.
Yeah, it's and another thing that I'd like to add is because I've always, when I was like, right, I'm gonna learn programming, and you sit down and you've kind of got the command line or whatever, you think, wow, I really don't know where to start. And I always tell people, I where I've done it is that so online with web design and stuff, you get snippets of code, and I'm sure it's a similar thing where you got like people's got some scripts which go into Dynamo or Grasshopper, and you load it up, and you can always backwards engineer it from there. You go, right, okay, so logically this must be doing this must be doing that. So if I change these variables, then you get a little bit of a different output, and then over time you get more and more confident that you start writing little bits. Yeah. So that's what I always advise people to do is look what other people have done first and tweak it for yourself in that theme that we're talking about, like a tool. You don't need to just learn maybe Python per se, but if you've got a task and then you learn Python enough to get the output you want, then that's a success story, right?
Oh, absolutely. And yes, it's a simple answer. Yes. I mean, learning to code is a strange thing, and it doesn't feel like something that maybe architects should be doing in terms of a classical definition of the industry. But the industry's changed a lot since those classical definitions were created. We now use 3D modeling softwares where, in many ways, closer to sort of um, animation in many
Yeah.
areas, and sort of the movie industry, or other such sort of high tech industries than we were 100 years ago, where we were sort of drawing everything and everything was hand done. It's an evolving art form, and we've evolved our skills over time. And coding, it's not, I think, a prerequisite for architecture. I don't think it ever will be, but I do think it's an important skill in terms of improving our control, and sort of improving our workflow, and how we produce our outputs and how we design.
Mhm.
But again, like, if you just want something simple to do, Google a tutorial how to do this, or how to build a website, or how to even something simple like learning how to run basic scripts on a computer is a really useful thing to do, because you can
Yeah.
use it to create new projects. You can use it to clean up your files. There are lots of very, very simple things you can do. And odds are, if you Google approximately what you want, find what someone else has done, and just modify it,
Yeah.
and
That's the
you're,
way to go.
yeah.
Yeah, I agree. And the last bit on this theme of scripting that I'd like to add is every architects are typically in Excel, and as well as BIM and Revit. And I'm amazed in the theme of what we're saying, Jordan, the amount of manual stuff that I see going on. Where equally, if you spent the time just to get that one Visual Basic script,
Mm,
or even a complete kind of complicated formula, the amount of time that you can save in Excel is phenomenal. And it's the same principle, isn't it? Whether it's
oh, absolutely.
Excel or Revit or whatever, you can optimize this stuff, but it's typically the learning curve to do it is difficult, so that people feel like, oh, I can't bother. And actually, I think that's one of the deceptive things with Chat GPT is that I think people just put in a prompt and you get something that generates out, and it's like, wow, there's no barrier to entry on it compared to the others. But then, like you say, you can only get so much results from it. Whereas if you go deeper and deeper and deeper, you can, over time, you can start making these tools extremely beneficial to your output. My opinion, you
Yes,
know?
yes, and but it's also worth bearing in mind that having understanding how things like ChatGPT work, even at a very, very low level, and just what's it expecting, how is it spitting that output out, means that you can actually then use those tools more powerfully. If you understand why ChatGPT spits out this answer, you
Yeah,
can then change your prompts to give it a more effective output. So even things like ChatGPT, while it feels like there's no learning curve, there is. It's just that it's spitting out the first answer, but that might not be the answer you want. You might want to change the answer. You might want it to give you a more accurate answer. So there are still even there variables that you would need to know over time. I think that goes into tools like ChatGPT and AI search engines. Effectively, I think are going to become a more useful tool in the future. I think it'll be a little while before it's in everything, but it will
yeah,
eventually happen. We probably get to a point where Revit has the ability of specifying an area, giving it parameters, and it will auto arrange it.
yeah,
Um, I'm very sure that will be a feature that they roll out very soon, because otherwise someone else will, and they'll have some interesting problems at that point. But yeah, a lot of it's just the learning curve, I think, for people. But it's also worth bearing in mind that everything has a learning curve. It's just that you've already put your time and engine to learning your current system, and
yeah,
there will always be a reduction of productivity when you learn something new. There's always going to be that annoying time that you feel like it's really hard and you can't get your head around it, and it takes you time to get up to the speed. But when you're up to speed, when if you commit to this system and it does work, and when you get to that point, it's fantastic, because then you can
mm,
actually utilize it. And a lot of people, I think, are quite stubborn's a bad word, but they sort of drag their heels. They're comfortable. They've got this little container that they use that works well enough for them,
yeah.
and they don't see the point in investing time and actually going down first to go up again.
Yeah, I agree, and that's why I just wanted to add it. It's not even just, for instance, while your role is fascinating because, like you said, you teased at the start that you made your own job title, but it's a newer space. That being said, though, if everyone had a little bit of this attitude in their jobs, then hopefully there's a not real opportunity to remove the mundane. The
Hmm.
last point I was gonna talk about is last year around October, uh, Midjourney came out AI, which is AI pictures, and there's a few others. The like OpenAI have their own one as well.
Hmm.
But remember, these videos came out and everyone was freaking out. Oh my gosh, they're going to replace the architects, yada, 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 yada. And I think it's all gone quiet. And that's how I feel like it was the fad. And listen, okay, I understand if you're an illustrator and you spare time and you spend these beautiful, you take hours doing these portraits or whatever, and this AI does it really quickly. But in architecture, apart from maybe a mood board or a feeling, I haven't really seen anyone use these mid-journey images in a project apart from one person which blurred mid-journey with traditional
Hmm.
methods to make some art. Have you seen any ripples in this space using it, or do you think it's been a
Mm,
bit of a fad?
Well, the problem with Midjourney, I haven't actually seen anyone that's used it in a kind of real world context. I've seen a few people play with it, but the problem with something like Midjourney is its control. Midjourney again it's a recurring neural network, so it can only take from the past. It can't make things that are new. So it's fully relying on whatever it's been fed beforehand. So it's great if you want to create something that's abstract or conceptual. So if you were going to go for sort of maybe a very stylized image, that could be where it would be quite useful. I see it being far more useful as an accent, potentially taking an existing building or a sketch and then elevating it with new visuals or conceptuality, or sort of allowing us to put layers on top. There are some really interesting use cases for it. For instance, we could use it for replacing or superimposing elements of a building. But the problem is it's just not efficient. I mean, and what's the difference between something like Midjourney and a render? At the end of the day, it's not real. You're just sticking textures. You click render, it's done. You could make the same argument versus sort of previously when people would hand draw and hand color and hand sort of render. It's just a slight evolution of the technology. We will definitely hit a point where, again, that becomes more useful, whereby it's built into a render engine, and maybe rather than having pre-made textures, you can just specify what you want and it can generate texture, it can generate background. The problem with technologies like this is that they're more showpieces. They release these kind of products not to make money. They're trying to actually get hype, because then they can sort of go to a big investment firm, something like SoftBank, and get a ton of money, or get bought up by a big tech company. That's more what they're actually trying to do. They're not really trying to. The great example is look at ChatGPT. ChatGPT was rolled out, and now it's being rolled into Bing. So that's going to be used for Bing for their search engine now. Yeah. So the reason they're big deals initially is because they're meant, and they're sort of portrayed as a toy, something to play with, something that can do something unique. In reality, there is a business intention behind it. They will be rolled out into something business oriented in the future. I suspect something like Midjourney will probably see its way into things like Photoshop and rendering engines and other such tools like that. It won't be a standalone tool, and it isn't really useful as a standalone tool. If you're an artist, maybe you can argue it's somewhat useful, but again, it's only taking existing images and tweaking them. And it's the same as, it'd be the same. It's pretty much limited to sort of a color by dots, effectively. If I gave you a color by dots and I said making a picture, you can make a very nice picture, but it still wouldn't be original. You can change the colors. Maybe you can ignore some of the dots and try and draw your own stuff. But at the end of the day, it's still based on that original image, and you're limited by that factor.
Yeah, well said. Really well said. For example, I've paid for Midjourney a few times, and the novelty wore off quick. Where it was good though for me was stuff like copyright infringements. So say now I want to make a thumbnail of a building which doesn't exist on a website. That's great, because then I won't get sued, which is nice. Because if you take images, then people, you've got to pay for that, and that's fine, and I agree with it. However, that's a very niche purpose, isn't it, Jordan? I'm not building a building from it. I can't really claim. And what I mean is, in a thumbnail, it's like an impression. It's quick. That's it. There's not much more substance apart from that. So that's been my experience on it. I was going to ask you one last thing. And audience, if you've got any questions for Jordan, now's the time, because he has got to go back to work before the BIM models crash and all that stuff. I don't want to be responsible. Although I think you've got a well-oiled machine. I don't want to get you in trouble or anything. What I was going to say, Jordan, is last year, depending on your passion, I did a lot of talk about the metaverse, okay? Some people loved it. I think I drove a lot of people insane talking about it. They're like, one more talk about the metaverse. But I think it's gone a little bit quiet this year on the metaverse. There's still stuff happening, and you said it quite rightly. There is a business case for it. But that being said, where is the metaverse going? I have a big question mark on it. What's your views on the metaverse, Jordan?
Based on sort of current funding for Facebook and sort of where it's going, I don't think it's going to just completely disappear, but Facebook are already looking like they're going to pull the plug on it a little bit.
Really?
Well, the whole premise of the metaverse was the reason why Facebook's invested so much in it is because Facebook is facing a reality where they make most of their money out of advertising, and they can't control the current internet. It's mostly controlled by companies like Google, and they don't like that. They have very limited control. Apple, for instance, released a privacy update. Basically, it removed all of their funding from Apple devices overnight, which is 50% of phones in America, for instance. Well, I think more actually at this point. So they basically wanted to create their own controlled ecosystem that they had full control over. That's primarily why they've invested so heavily in it. The problem with the metaverse is that it's very, very over controlled by Facebook. They don't really want anyone else having too much control with it. The other problem is that it's basically relying on technologies like VR headsets and systems like Oculus to actually be able to use it. So the barrier for entry is really high. So I think that would have to come down massively. And the other problem is it's just, technically speaking, really struggling. It's very heavily reliant on these very, very sophisticated 3D augmentation devices, things like glasses. Those are very expensive, and unless everyone has it, it's just not accessible. It's the same reason as why anyone adopts any technology. The barrier for entry has to be low enough that the average person can do it. Look at Laserdisc. Technologies like that were arguably better, but just never takes off because the barrier for entry is too expensive, too high. They look like they're going to be spinning towards more business-oriented models soon. They have some interesting ideas of a virtual office. I don't know how I feel about that. It's quite clever, but the other argument is, would you want to sit in a virtual office all day, every day, with a headset on? I think the average person would say no. I could see for architecture there could be some very good uses, because you could actually have a real built, you could have an actual building that you can walk around, look at, and understand. And I've seen some, they're not truly metaverse, but I've seen some really interesting ideas of how buildings could actually be augmented by AI. For instance, sounds quite sci-fi, but we are actually having sort of the idea of a holodeck is becoming quite close to reality at this point, with the idea being that you can have spaces that are accentuated by AR. There are people now who are developing kinesthetic suits, kinesthetic gloves, where if you touch something, it puts pressure back so you can actually feel it. A lot of it's sort of tricking the senses with these new technologies. The big limitation with the metaverse is it's basically just one company trying to take the whole industry, when in reality, all of these other very clever technologies, they've been around there for a while, and they do their own thing. And Facebook's just trying to essentially, they are very heavily invested in. They want to be the default. They want to be the Google of the Web3 effectively. So it's very difficult to say when it'll be, because it depends on how you define it. If we're talking about Facebook's metaverse, I don't think that's going to have a very good lifespan. It's just not, doesn't work. But if we're talking about the metaverse as a concept, because they are actually different things, I think that will definitely take off. But I think it's going to be a few years off before we actually start seeing it, because it's going to require things like VR to sort of come down in price even more, augmented reality to be a little more mainstream. But there are some really clever bits of technology we're already starting to see. If you have an iPhone and you use Apple Maps, the 3 people that do that, they actually have some very clever AI in there. So you can actually hold it up against a street, and it will in 3D project signs on the street to tell you where you're going.
Yeah, well said. I completely agree with you. As someone that owns a HTC Vive for the first generation, I absolutely love it, but it's not practical for everyone. It's not the kind of thing you can whack up in an office or transport that easy. Possible, not impossible, but as you say, the more portable the technology is, the kind of the trade-off in the immersion is that's kind of my feel on it. And like you say, it's a very niche case, use case point or whatever, because really we're all using screens and stuff. So I agree with you. What I was going to say, though, Jordan, I've been asking you all the questions. Now, feel free to fire a few at me if you have any.
Ooh.
I haven't practiced architecture for a while, but what I do, I guess, is I recruit with architecture practices. So I'm aware of the trends of current employers with techs and stuff and what has filtered down the trough, what hasn't. Do you have any questions for me at all?
Ooh, that's difficult. Should have thought that beforehand. Well, here's a good one for you. As someone that sort of does work in the recruitment industry, what sort of technologies are you seeing employers ask for at the moment, mostly?
Good question, and always changing. That being said, though, so 10 years ago, Revit was a novelty that not many people understood, or it was kind of on the wish list to get. Just had to cut off a phone call. Sorry, I should have turned that off before it. So Revit before was like, oh, that would be a nice to have. Let's see if we can have someone with that skill set, or we're not really there yet. MicroStation is still the main one, but now Revit is the de facto, right? And for anyone that's resisted during learning BIM up until now, then you need Revit. There is no maybe unless you're a small architecture practice that's kind of perhaps in rural England and they're happy with CAD, fine. But if you want to go for any of the big players, Revit is the de facto. And the other one that I see more and more popular is Rhino has always been a nice to have in the larger architecture practices, especially if they do design. But now I'm actually seeing Grasshopper be a desirable skill set. And before it was like no one even thought about it, but now the magical combo is Revit, Rhino, and Grasshopper for a mainstream architecture practice, a large architecture practice in London. For a medium-sized architecture practice, I reckon that a lot of them are probably looking for Revit, and if you can bring a bit of parametric design or whatever, that's kind of cool. Because actually, you've got a lot of skill set, and you know more than anyone. Actually, in a smaller office, you fast if you're the tech guy, if you understand BIM a bit more, you become that BIM champion, and
Yeah.
so yeah, I think that those are the skill set that's popular. I never, as a recruitment consultancy, get a brief from a client anymore which says AutoCAD. I have one client I know that he still uses Vectorworks, but they're moving to Revit. So it's kind of like if the person has Revit, that's important. But then if they understand Vectorworks, then that's useful too. But that's a minority. And I do think, though, if you don't understand Revit, it can hinder your career. Even if I know some practices should train people up, but I think employers generally are going to look for some BIM experience. You don't need to be the BIM guru, but some initiative to learn it. And I do think, though, that it's a old conversation I've had for the last 10 years about should I learn BIM, and now it's not even a should. It's like you must learn Revit, you know?
I was going to say it's probably worth for anyone that's watching that is trying to learn or wants to learn Revit. It feels daunting, but you also don't need to know all of it. Revit is a massive bit of software. It goes off into every direction and it starts to feed into other softwares like Navisworks very quickly. The core premise of Revit: learn how to build a family properly. That's when everyone gets lazy and doesn't bother to do the basic, tools like walls, floors, doors. They're fine, and also learn how to locate your projects properly. If you can do those basic things and obviously put it on a sheet, you're probably all right for most basic BIM stuff. The more advanced things like schedules and making families parametric, they're great, but they are where it gets a lot more complicated, and your mistakes will have a lot more of an impact. So if you can get those basic premises, learn how to build a wall properly, learn how to build a floor properly, learn how to do staircases reasonably well. Custom staircases are nice to learn. Most tutorials recommend learning those quite late in the day. I'd say it's better to learn them sooner than later because staircases are something you're going to use all the time, and they are generally a more complicated element anyway. if you can deal with those basic things and learn how to sort of set the basic project up, you're fine. And put the sort of more parametric side, the more sort of advanced settings within Revit to the background. Deal with those later, because that's also where it starts to come to a BIM manager anyway. So you may not even need those in many practices. It depends on the practice. Like some practices do like their architects and their sort of part twos, part ones to know a little bit about that. Some don't. It seems to vary a little bit.
Yeah, you're spot on. So, Jordan, we blasted through. I don't know where time's gone. It's been an hour already. Yeah, super impressive. So I'm going to give you a massive round of applause, because you've been an absolute star, a natural. It's been like autopilot for me, because it's your expertise is so interesting. So, but it's such a vast subject, so it's hard to cover everything. I'm sure we can, return to a few topics in the future. Yeah. However, if someone wants to get in contact with you now, Jordan, and all that stuff, where can they find you? What practice you work at? And where are you online?
Oh, probably best at the moment is Hail Architecture, which is my email for the practice is jharris@hail-adm.com. And I'm on the website as well. That's the best for the moment. If you want to send me any directly, my email is mr@jordanlharris.com, which is also my website. Don't go to it right now. It's not currently very nice. Working, learning to code, break things all the time, mucking around with it the last few days. Probably be nice in about a week or so when I can be asked to re-upload the actual proper website. But hey ho. But other than that, yeah, any questions about any of the many varying topics I've talked today, I'm more than happy to chat about. I could talk about any one of these topics for several hours. I'm very sure, so I will avoid doing that today. Stick it to 1 hour, I think is best. But yeah, have you got any more questions for me, or any questions?
No, I think that was it. We had the passionate Patrick Wilson that popped in, but I'm thrilled with that. I think that you've done an amazing job of giving like an introduction on this moment in time. Who knows, Jordan? Maybe like in a few months we'll look back and things will have changed already, because the space is moving, but that's part of it. So I'll give you the last round of applause. You've been an absolute gentleman. Thank you so much. On that note, I'm going to end the live stream in a second. So Jordan, you've been an absolute pleasure. If you want to get in touch with Jordan, you can find him on LinkedIn or his website. Jordan's been very modest. It's a decent website, and it will be all new very soon. Or you can contact him at hail-adm.com. So Hail Architects, very cool stuff as well. On that note, I'm going to end it now. Thank you so much for being here during your lunch break. We've got more shows coming up. Jordan, stay on the stage while I end the live stream. And for you in the audience, I will see you soon. Take care. All right.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.